What happens when a beloved country music icon walks onto a talk show set expecting nothing more than a warm, friendly conversation about her new album, only to find herself face to face with a host determined to drag her into the quicksand of political controversy? What unfolds is one of the most jaw-dropping, unforgettable moments in daytime television history. It's a moment where Joy Behar believed she could steamroll right over Reba McEntire, pressing her into a corner, but instead ended up receiving a reality check so sharp and unexpected that it left her speechless while the studio audience gasped in disbelief. This is the story of how one of country music's most respected and enduring voices, someone who has spent decades earning admiration from millions, masterfully turned the tables on a host who clearly underestimated her grace, intelligence, and strength. Make sure to subscribe and leave your thoughts in the comments, because once you hear how this train wreck unfolded, you're definitely going to want to discuss it. The morning began like any other at the View Studios, cameras being tested, lights humming overhead, producers hustling across the floor, and interns rushing clipboards from one corner of the room to another. Reba McEntire, known for her breathtaking vocals, fiery red hair, and a presence that commands both warmth and respect, had arrived earlier than expected. She walked into the studio with her signature smile, wearing an elegant navy blazer that struck the perfect balance between confidence and charm. She had been invited to talk about her upcoming tour and her latest album, something she had done hundreds of times throughout her long, decorated career. With decades in the music industry, Reba had grown accustomed to navigating interviews effortlessly, radiating professionalism, humor, and authenticity. As she sat comfortably in the green chair, adjusting the tiny microphone clipped neatly to her blazer, she had absolutely no idea what the next hour would bring to her. This was just another friendly press appearance. The View had always been a place she enjoyed visiting. Over the years, she'd shared laughter, heartfelt stories, and moments of genuine connection with the hosts. But today felt different. She could sense something in the air, a subtle but undeniable tension swirling beneath the surface. The usual buzz of excitement was replaced by an undercurrent of something sharper, something heavier. "We're back in 30 seconds," the floor manager shouted across the studio, prompting a sudden burst of motion from the crew. Makeup artists dabbed last. It touches onto the hosts' faces. Camera operators positioned themselves into perfect alignment, and the studio audience was instructed to quiet down and stay ready. Reba took a moment to smooth the hem of her blazer, then looked up to meet the eyes of the other hosts. Whoopi Goldberg caught her gaze and gave her a warm, reassuring nod, one that silently said, "You're good." "We're glad you're here." Reba appreciated that. Whoopi had always been gracious and respectful toward her. They had crossed paths many times, and each time Whoopi carried herself with professionalism and kindness. But despite the friendly nod, the tension Reba felt earlier hadn't faded. In fact, it seemed to intensify the closer they came to going live. She could sense something brewing, nothing she could name, but something she couldn't ignore either. The stage lights brightened, the audience applause sign lit up, the theme music faded, and then the recording began. What Reba didn't know, what no one had bothered to tell her, was that Joy Behar had come into the studio that morning with an entirely different agenda. Instead of celebrating Reba's new music or discussing the exciting stops on her upcoming tour, Joy had decided she wanted drama, she wanted confrontation, she wanted to drag Reba into a heated political debate, a subject Reba rarely waded into publicly. The producers hadn't warned Reba, no one gave her a hint. She was walking into an ambush with a smile on her face. As the opening introductions rolled, Reba maintained her calm, friendly demeanor. She greeted the hosts, thanked them for having her, and shared a laugh with the audience. But the moment Joy cleared her throat, leaned forward, and narrowed her eyes, Reba felt the shift. It was subtle, but unmistakable. Joy wasn't interested in music today. She wasn't interested in the tour. She wasn't even interested in the guest sitting across from her. She wanted a reaction. She wanted to push. She wanted to drag Reba into a conversation that was guaranteed to spark heated debate. Reba's instincts sharpened instantly. She had spent years dealing with media personalities, critics, and intense interviews. But rarely had she encountered a host this determined to turn a friendly discussion into a battlefield. Joy started with a question disguised as casual curiosity, but it quickly revealed its true purpose. A pointed, politically charged trap designed to catch Reba off guard. The audience felt it. The other hosts felt it. Even Whoopi's expression shifted, sensing where Joy was trying to go. But what Joy didn't know was that Reba McEntire may be soft-spoken, polite, and deeply gracious, but she is not someone who gets pushed around. She is not easily intimidated, nor is she one to crumble under pressure. And when she realized what Joy was attempting to do, she didn't panic. She didn't freeze. Instead, she leaned back slightly, took a quiet breath, and prepared to respond with the kind of poise and strength that has defined her career for decades. What followed next would become the talk of social media, entertainment news, and daytime television fans everywhere. A moment where a country music legend flipped the script with grace, humility, and sharp, undeniable truth. A moment that proved you should never underestimate someone simply because they choose kindness over confrontation. The audience wasn't ready. Joy certainly wasn't ready. And by the time it was over, the room would never be the same. Joy wasn't satisfied, not even a little. Reba's calm, diplomatic answer had rolled off her like water off a roof, and Joy wasn't having it. She leaned forward, her eyes sharp with determination. "That's a nice deflection," she snapped, her tone cutting through the studio like a blade. "But we both know country music has a problem with diversity, with inclusion. Your genre has historically excluded voices of color, and even today the industry is struggling with representation. Don't you think you have a responsibility, you, as one of the biggest names in the business, to call out these systemic issues?" For the first time, something shifted in Reba's expression. The audience saw it, a flash in her eyes, a spark of steel beneath all that southern charm. This wasn't the smiling, effortlessly warm Reba McEntire everyone knew from album covers and award shows. This was Reba the survivor, Reba the fighter, Reba the woman who clawed her way to the top of an industry that hadn't always been kind to anyone, including her. "Joy," Reba began, her voice still soft, still controlled, but now holding a firmness that made the entire room lean forward. "I think you need to do your homework before you start making accusations." The words were gentle, but the message was unmistakably sharp. Country music has always been influenced by blues, gospel, folk traditions rooted in every community, including communities of color. Artists like Charlie Pride, Darius Rucker, Mickey Guyton, Kane Brown. These people aren't tokens. They're talented musicians who earned their place because of hard work and heart, not because someone handed them a spot to look politically correct. The audience murmured. Even a couple of the panelists shifted awkwardly in their seats, but Joy was undeterred. Whether she didn't notice the warning signs or simply refused to acknowledge them, she pushed harder, but historically. Joy insisted, her voice rising just a little. "The country music establishment has been exclusionary, and frankly, your silence on social justice issues speaks volumes. When Black Lives Matter was at its peak, where was Reba McEntire's voice?" The temperature in the studio seemed to drop 10 degrees. Even the cameras felt like they froze. You could hear the audience inhale as one. Sharp, uneasy. Reba didn't flinch. She didn't blink. She didn't look rattled. She simply leaned forward, placing her hands gently on the table, and spoke in a measured voice that somehow managed to carry more weight than shouting ever could. "My silence, Joy," she repeated, her tone cool but edged with unmistakable authority. "You clearly haven't been paying attention to my career, my actions, or my values. I've spent 40 years, 4 decades, supporting charitable causes, funding programs for underprivileged kids, helping families rebuild after disasters, donating to shelters, supporting music education, and giving people opportunities no matter where they come from." Her voice grew stronger, not louder, but deeper, richer, steadier, the kind of tone that didn't need volume to command respect. "But let me tell you something," she continued. "I don't feel the need to post every good deed I do on social media to earn political points. I don't turn charity into a performance. I don't use human suffering as a branding opportunity. When I help someone, it's because it's the right thing to do, not because I want applause from Twitter, Instagram." A wave of murmurs rippled through the audience. Some people clapped softly. Others simply watched in stunned silence. Even Whoopi raised her eyebrows, impressed. Joy's face, however, told an entirely different story. The confidence she normally carried, the quick wit, the sharp tongue, the swagger of someone used to dominating the conversation, was slipping. Her expression tightened. Her shoulders stiffened. Her smile, usually forced but functional, was now melting into something closer to panic. She hadn't expected this. She hadn't expected Reba to stand her ground. Not with such composure, not with such clarity, and certainly not with this level of force behind her words. Joy was used to rattling guests, to pushing them until they cracked or stuttered or lashed out emotionally. But Reba wasn't cracking. She wasn't flustered. She wasn't intimidated. She was unmovable. Joy opened her mouth again, maybe to double down, maybe to backpedal, but the audience sensed she was losing her footing. The usual tactics weren't working. Her attempts to intimidate, to corner, to politicize the conversation were dissolving right in front of her. Reba didn't gloat. She didn't smirk. She didn't take pleasure in watching Joy scramble for control. Instead, she maintained the same centered composure she had walked in with, the same calm, but now fortified with the undeniable reality that she wasn't someone who could be bullied. By this point, the energy in the room had completely shifted. What Joy had expected to be an ambush had quietly transformed into a public unraveling. Hers, and Reba, with her grace, intelligence, and unfaltering strength, had turned the moment into a masterclass in dignity under fire. Joy's face was reddening now, a deep, unmistakable red, because it was finally sinking in. Her usual playbook had failed, and Reba McEntire, the woman she assumed she could corner, had just handed her the kind of reality check that daytime television doesn't forget. Joy wasn't done, not even close. She leaned forward, her expression tightening into a look of practiced indignation. "Well, it's convenient," she said sharply, "that you can hide behind charity work instead of taking real political stands. Your fans deserve to know exactly where you stand on the issues that affect their daily lives." The words were meant to sting. They were meant to corner. They were meant to throw Reba off balance. But instead of backing down, Reba lifted her chin slightly. Her eyes sharpened, and the easygoing softness in her voice began to shift into something stronger, something more grounded, her Oklahoma roots cutting through with unmistakable clarity. "And what makes you think they don't know?" she replied, her tone firm and steady. "You're sitting here telling me what my fans think, what they believe, what they deserve." She paused, letting the silence press into the room. "But tell me this, Joy, when's the last time you actually talked to any of them?" The audience stirred. A few people murmured. Several leaned forward, anticipating what was coming next. Reba didn't stop. "When's the last time you stepped outside the studio, outside your bubble?" She continued and visited a small town in America. "When's the last time you sat down with families who are struggling, really struggling, and listened to them instead of lecturing them?" The studio air tightened like a pulled string. Even the lighting seemed to shift, as if the room itself was bracing for impact. The other hosts exchanged glances, wide-eyed, nervous glances. You could practically hear their thoughts. "This is not going according to Joy's plan." Whoopi cleared her throat, instinctively reacting the way a seasoned moderator does when she senses a conversation careening into dangerous territory. Her posture straightened. Her hand twitched subtly, as if preparing to step in. But Joy wasn't done. She was too deep into the attack to reverse course now. Pride, stubbornness, and the belief that she had the moral high ground were pushing her forward like a runaway train. "I don't need to visit small town America to understand what your fan base supports." Joy snapped, her voice rising in volume and pitch. "Your fans consistently vote for politicians who undermine women's rights, who oppose environmental protections, who slow down social progress. And your refusal to condemn those choices, your silence, makes you complicit in perpetuating harmful systems." You could have heard a pin drop. For a split second, the entire energy of the room froze, like the world itself had inhaled and forgotten how to exhale. A storm had just been summoned, and everyone knew it. That was the moment everything changed. The tone, the dynamic, the power in the room. Reba didn't just look offended. She looked awakened. A fire lit behind her eyes that no one on that set had seen before, not in all her previous visits, not on any talk show. She slowly leaned back in her chair, not out of retreat, but out of control, regaining her center. grounding herself like someone preparing to deliver a blow so clean and resolute that it doesn't require anger to land. When she finally leaned forward again, her voice was calm, too calm, the kind of calm that comes right before lightning strikes. "Joy," she said, her tone low, steady, and unmistakably firm. "Let me explain something to you. Just because people live in small towns doesn't mean they're ignorant. Just because they don't vote the way you prefer doesn't mean they're villains. They're parents, they're workers, they're people trying to put food on the table, raise their families, and keep their communities afloat." She held Joy's gaze without flinching. "And before you accuse me of being complicit, maybe you should step outside this studio and meet the people you're so comfortable criticizing from a distance." A ripple of gasps moved across the audience like a wave. Reba wasn't raising her voice. She didn't need to. Every word was landing harder than volume ever could. Joy blinked. Once, twice. Her jaw tightened, and she opened her mouth, but no sound came out. For someone who prided herself on never losing control of an argument, she suddenly looked uncertain, almost startled by how hard her own attack had backfired. The other hosts sat frozen. One of them shifted in her chair. Another cleared her throat awkwardly. Whoopi glanced at Joy, then at Reba, then out toward the audience, her face the expression of someone witnessing a train barreling toward a cliff. The equilibrium of the panel had collapsed. The power dynamic had flipped, and the audience could feel it. Reba continued, still calm but with a razor-sharp edge. "You want to lecture me about responsibility. I've spent my life uplifting people. Quietly, consistently, without cameras and hashtags. You want to talk about harmful systems. Maybe start with the harm that comes from assuming moral superiority over millions of people you've never met." The words hit the table like thunder. Joy swallowed hard, visibly shaken now. Whatever comeback she had prepared evaporated before she could voice it. Her shoulders stiffened, but her confidence, her certainty, was slipping like sand through her fingers. Reba wasn't done, but she didn't need to raise her voice. The room was hers. The moment was hers. Everything Joy had tried to weaponize had been turned around with surgical precision. And that moment, the exact second Joy realized she had pushed too far, underestimated the wrong guest, and walked straight into a verbal hurricane she could not control, that was the moment everything changed. Reba's entire demeanor transformed in an instant. The soft, spoken country sweetheart, the warm, gracious woman the audience had known for decades, vanished. In her place sat someone entirely different, a woman forged by 40 years in an unforgiving industry, a woman who had clawed her way to the top through grit, heartbreak, resilience, and relentless work. She wasn't just a performer, she was an empire, and she wasn't about to let anyone, especially not a daytime talk show host, tear down her legacy or insult the millions of people who had lifted her along the way. Slowly, with absolute intention, Reba set her coffee cup down on the table. Clink. It was a tiny sound, barely noticeable under normal circumstances, but in that moment it sliced through the studio like a blade. The audience felt it, the crew felt it, every host on the panel felt it. When Reba lifted her gaze back to Joy, there was something in her eyes, something fierce, unwavering, almost electric, that made the entire room go still. This was no longer the polite guest who had walked onto the set that morning with a smile and a gracious heart. This was a woman who had survived cutthroat managers, unfair contracts, personal tragedy, broken marriage, financial battles, and every ruthless corner of the entertainment business. She knew exactly when to stay sweet, and exactly when to stand her ground. "Joy," Reba began, her voice calm, too calm, but laced with a power that made every person present straighten in their seats. "Let me tell you something about complicity." She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to, the weight of it carried. "Complicity," she continued, "is sitting in a comfortable New York City studio earning 6 figures, passing judgment on people you've never met, while pretending you speak for working families." Joy's eyes widened slightly, but before she could respond, Reba kept going. "Complicity," she said again, slower this time, "is assuming that anyone who doesn't share your exact political views must be ignorant, hateful, or backward. That's not compassion, that's arrogance." Joy opened her mouth to interrupt, but Reba lifted one hand, one single hand, and Joy stopped talking. It wasn't rude, It wasn't aggressive, it was just final. A gesture from someone who knew she had the floor now and wasn't about to relinquish it. "No," Reba said firmly, "you've had your say, now it's my turn." The audience held its collective breath. "You want to talk about my fans?" Reba asked. "Fine, let me introduce you to a few of them." She leaned forward, her tone rich with emotion, every syllable deliberate. "Let me tell you about Sarah from Tennessee," she said. "A single mother working 3 jobs. 3. She saved for months, Joy, just to bring her little girl to one of my concerts, because for those few hours, our music is the only thing that helps them forget their problems." The room stayed dead silent, not a cough, not a shuffle. Everyone was locked in. "Or maybe you'd prefer I tell you about Frank from Iowa," Reba continued. "A veteran battling PTSD, a man who barely sleeps some nights, but he finds peace, real honest peace, in the songs that remind him of home, the songs that remind him he's not alone." Reba didn't blink. Her stare remained locked on Joy. "These people, you call them backward, uneducated, problematic voters," she said, "but they are real people with real lives, real wounds, real hopes, not the cartoon villains you've painted in your head." A murmur of agreement moved quietly through the audience. "These are the people who write to me," Reba said softly, "who tell me their stories, who bring their children to my shows because it's the only joy they can afford that month. They're not political talking points. They're human beings." Joy shifted in her chair. Her confidence, so sharp and aggressive only minutes earlier, was beginning to crack. She looked down for a moment, then back up, but her face had drained of its typical fire. She tried to jump back in, tried to reassert control. "Well," Joy began, but her voice wavered just slightly, and that slight shake was all it took for the audience to feel it. Joy Behar, the woman known for dominating arguments, was losing this one. The other hosts exchanged glances, long, uneasy glances. One raised her eyebrows, another pressed her lips together, unsure whether to intervene or stay silent. Even the camera operators, professionals who had seen every kind of on-air drama, stood unusually still, their hands frozen on the controls, as if they didn't dare miss a second. The tension was so thick it felt physical. Reba wasn't yelling. She didn't need to shout to command the room. Her strength came from certainty, from knowing exactly who she was, what she had built, and whom she represented. And nothing Joy said could shake that. The audience leaned forward in their seats, the atmosphere electric and unblinking. For the first time since the segment began, Joy tried, really tried, to regain control. She inhaled, steadied herself, and spoke again, though her voice betrayed that she no longer held the power she thought she had when she started this. "Reba," she said, attempting calm, but failing to hide the tremor underneath, "I'm simply trying to point out." But the sentence broke off halfway, swallowed by the weight of what Reba had just unleashed, and in that suspended moment, the audience, the hosts, the crew, everyone understood the truth. This interview would go down in history. Joy tried to steady her voice, insisting she wasn't targeting anyone personally. But before she could smooth over the tension she had created, Reba cut in sharply, her voice slicing through the air like a hot knife through butter. The studio suddenly felt smaller, heavier, as her words echoed with unmistakable precision. "Look," Reba said, leaning slightly forward, her expression calm but unyielding, "you keep saying we can't ignore the broader political implications. But what you really mean, what you're not actually saying out loud, is the implication of a coastal elite telling Middle America what they should think, feel, or believe. You mean the implication of dismissing entire communities because they don't vote the way you want them to." Joy's mouth opened, but no sound came out at first. She had been expecting pushback, sure, but not this level of unapologetic clarity. Before she could recover, Whoopi raised a cautious hand, sensing the storm that was rapidly intensifying. "Ladies," Whoopi began, her voice calm, even gentle, "maybe we should." But Joy refused the lifeline. "No, Whoopi, let her finish," she said, even though the crack in her bravado was now visible to everyone in the studio. Her voice wavered ever so slightly. "I want to hear how Reba justifies staying silent while her massive platform could be used to educate people on important social issues." Reba let out a laugh, sharp, cold, cutting. It wasn't a laugh of amusement. It was the kind that told everyone she had been expecting this moment. "Educate people?" Reba repeated, raising an eyebrow. "Joy, do you hear yourself? You're sitting here acting as though anyone who doesn't echo your talking points needs to be educated, as if the only possible explanation for disagreement is ignorance. That's not education. That's indoctrination." The audience murmured, a ripple of discomfort spreading across the room, and frankly, Reba continued, unwavering, "It's incredibly insulting to millions of Americans who are perfectly capable of thinking for themselves. People don't need to be spoon-fed opinions by celebrities to know what matters to them." Joy leaned forward, her voice growing tighter. "But surely you must see that some issues are black and white," she insisted, wiping the sweat that had begun gathering near her temple. "Human rights, equality, basic decency. These aren't political opinions, they're moral imperatives." Reba paused, then nodded slowly. "You're absolutely right." For a brief moment, Joy's shoulders lowered, relief flickering across her face. She thought she had found common ground at last, until Reba continued. "They are moral imperatives," she said, her voice calm but firm. "Which is why I find it so troubling that you seem to think you and people who think exactly like you have some kind of monopoly on morality." Joy froze. "Let me ask you something, Joy," Reba said, leaning back slightly but keeping her eyes fixed on her. "When's the last time you visited a food bank in rural America? When's the last time you volunteered at a homeless shelter outside Manhattan? Outside your comfort zone? When's the last time you rolled up your sleeves and actually spent time with the communities you claim to care so deeply about?" Joy's face turned a deeper shade of red, her composure slipping visibly as the audience leaned in, captivated and anxious. "I support numerous charities and causes," she said defensively, her voice trembling just enough to expose the pressure she was under. "I've donated," Reba cut in before she could finish. "Writing checks from your penthouse is not the same as understanding people's lives." The words hung in the air like a challenge, like a truth too rarely spoken on national television. "You talk about moral imperatives," Reba continued, her voice steady, almost eerily calm compared to Joy's rising panic. "But morality isn't measured in public statements or carefully crafted donations. It's measured in empathy, in humility, in being willing to step outside the echo chamber and actually listen to people who see the world differently, and not just listen, but respect them." Joy blinked rapidly, her veneer of confidence slipping. She looked around the table for support, but found only tense silence and a few sympathetic but cautious glances. Even Whoopi seemed reluctant to intervene now, sensing that any attempt to calm things might spark an even deeper confrontation. Reba gently folded her hands on the table. "You say you want to educate people, but education without humility becomes arrogance. You say you stand for equality, yet you treat dissenting voices like they are beneath you. You say you want unity, yet you divide the moment someone disagrees with you. How is that leadership? How is that morality?" Joy swallowed hard. The cameras caught the movement, the strain in her jaw, the tiny tremble at the corner of her mouth. This wasn't just a debate, it was a dismantling. Reba continued, not unkindly, but with a sincerity that made her words even harder to deflect. "You don't have to agree with everyone, no one is saying that, but if your first instinct is to assume people are uneducated, misinformed, or morally inferior simply because they don't think like you, then maybe the issue isn't their ignorance, maybe it's your lack of understanding." The entire studio had gone silent. Even the producers behind the cameras stopped moving, hanging on to every word. "You claim to champion empathy," Reba said softly, "but empathy that excludes millions of people isn't empathy. It's performance." Joy opened her mouth again, but no words came out. She seemed to realize that anything she said would only dig her hole deeper. Reba leaned back, letting the moment settle. "So before you accuse others of silence," she added, "maybe ask yourself whether you're truly listening, or just waiting for your turn to speak." And with that, the room exhaled, though Joy still looked stunned, her confidence fractured, her argument dismantled piece by piece.